My name is Colton Hubbard. I'm the program director at the International Youth Foundation. I'm excited to be here because I love this program. I think it's very exciting, but also I come from a rural background myself. I grew up on a potato farm in upstate New York. Yes, we have farms there. So I've really enjoyed the sessions. A lot of it resonates well with me, and I'm excited to hear all of your perspectives. So thank you to my three panelists. As Stacy alluded to, we're going to be touching on a couple of different issues, all in the socio-emotional health or non-academic bucket. So what are those, as we know, academic success and even academic success aligned to the workforce is one thing, but what else? What else do students need to be supported and to engage and to be set up for success in school and in their life? So I'd like to start with Eliseo. Based on your experience living in the region, your professional experience, not just at CIS, but what you've seen, how are we doing? How are communities doing in connecting with schools and sort of filling some of those gaps?
I mean, in general, in the state of Texas, speaking for that, and have a lot of experience with a lot of districts here in the state, I have to be honest, and that's what you'll get from me. And so you asked. So we're doing a terrible job in general. So maybe some of the present company excluded, but I know I've got some educators and counselors and teachers here that do a wonderful job. But in general, we're just not meeting the needs, and you'll see that as evidence in the legislative session that's going on right now. It's just finishing up. There's a lot of bills that have come up in the House and the Senate that are addressing those issues because they don't feel that it's been addressed. So the mental health and mental wellness, school safety, all of those things. And so even Congress sees that there's a specific need to address these issues because they haven't been met.
Thank you. And I'll turn now to Daniel. Daniel, part of the LEAPS initiative was sort of an interesting survey where we gathered some of the mental health needs context in the communities we're working in. Can you give us an idea of what sort of things you were finding from the survey results or from your own experience and observation?
Sure. So I'm the program manager in our West Texas region, and I work with two of the schools, Bomberay and Pecos, and I'm actually was born and raised in Pecos, and so I have a really tight connection to that community. But we did this mental health survey where we met with different youth from both schools, and we basically asked them just simple questions around mental health and wellness to help them help us guide in the way that we needed to bring services. So what we found was in both schools, which is also reflected that what we saw with the larger data, is that anxiety and depression are the symptoms that are highest present in those communities. I think we also saw insomnia and bullying. And then what we also saw was that there was some barriers that came up around gender. So we explored a little bit more to see what was preventing maybe reaching out for services if they were available. And so we heard that there were different barriers based on gender. So we thought that was fascinating. And then to help us find a solution, we asked questions around what would be helpful in if we provided certain activities around these concerns, what would be more interesting to the youth. And so the top three were outdoor activities, creative arts therapy, and one-on-one counseling. And so that's been our focus thus far with LEAPS in regards to the mental health area.
Great, thank you, Daniel. And Shannon, as the earlier panelists alluded to, you've been using the Passport to Success curriculum in your classroom, but I also know you've had a long educational or long teaching experience and an interesting and varied career. So can you sort of give us a nutshell? How do you think we're doing in terms of behavioral skills instruction and giving youth the opportunities to learn some of those skills within classrooms?
Actually, it's for me to talk about it, I like looking at it just in the small general area where I am and in the small communities. But on a national level, I would agree we are behind on the curveball here. And it's sad to see so many people that are getting left out. But I can honestly say in the community where I am, we really are putting that effort out. And by using the Passport to Success this year, and in the last year we used another program that has a very similar theory behind it. And it's pretty much I'm more of a mediator in the class. You give the students the lead, and then you get them, like we said, everybody gets involved and they have their own say-so in things. And by allowing that, it's giving them some of the soft skills that they really need. It's giving them that ownership of the class in itself, and it's building their self-esteem. And I can honestly see a lot of it as far as some of the different curriculum that we're using. They're opening up on a different level now, because in the beginning, they're all sitting there and they all have that chip on their shoulder of, well, especially since they're freshmen, I'm here, and I'm going to say what I'm going to say. But then they start realizing that people within their class, within the high school themselves, they're all facing the same problems. And when they find out that they're not alone, they're more willing to talk about it. So I think we are making a little progress, and I see it at our school for sure. And I'm starting to see it by talking to other teachers that are using the same type of program that they're making the success. But the problem is when you have the schools that are still stuck with this is how it is, I'm going to go in, I'm going to teach my class, they're going to sit, they're going to be quiet, and they're going to learn from me. We can't just do it that way anymore, because that's not how our students learn now. So we have to adjust with the times.
I'm going to stay with you for a moment because I'd like to build on something you've said. I hear that in addition to just sort of teaching the skills or giving opportunities to build these skills, it can also change the way students are relating to each other and maybe to the teachers themselves. So have you noticed a change in just the overall environment, or is that still to come maybe?
I do see it, that it is starting now already. For example, in my classes, I have anywhere from your upper level, the straight A students, all the way down to I have an extreme life skill student in there. And when you first put them all together, they're separated in their own little sections of the classroom. And then as we work in the various groups, and they're not ever in the same group because they're chosen at random ways how to put them in the groups, they learn to work together. And it's simply amazing to me to see how some of especially and I don't know if I'm being gender-based here, but the girls are very picky about, I'm this and I'm that, and they don't want to be involved with certain people. But even those girls have come and stepped out and stepped forward, and they're so willing to help the other people without making those students feel bad. So they sit there and they are helping each other. So I see it a lot already.
Great, that's good to hear. Eliseo, I'd like to go back to you for a moment. Can you tell us more about the CIS model and how you are working to meet the needs of young people and their families, maybe those needs that the school is not equipped or able to address, but that can create obstacles to participation?
Yeah, those of you that are not familiar with communities and schools, it's, in a nutshell, it's a dropout prevention program. But which means that we work with at-risk youth to keep them in school and get them graduated. Okay, so that's boiled down. But what we're able to do is, and I want to emphasize this point as well. We don't replace teachers or counselors or anything like that. The important thing to remember is that we augment what they do. Okay, so and I know I came up through the corporate world. But I did have a stint as a high school physics teacher, and it's, that you see a student, and when you're a teacher or administrator or a counselor, especially in small schools, you're very, very attuned to the kids, but you don't have any time to meet with them because you're locked into the school day, right? And the 50 minutes, and then you got to get ready for the next class in between breaks. And then so you might have 30 seconds, 60 seconds tops, to meet with the student and find out what's going on, why they're acting out, why they've got their head on the desk, or what have you. And because they're being butt heads for a reason most of the time. They're not doing it on purpose just to be out there, there's something going on, and you know that, but you just don't have time to do that. Communities and schools comes in, and it's a big, unique characteristic that gives us a leg up on a lot of nonprofits is the fact that my staff members, when we serve a school district or a campus rather, they're embedded at that campus. And so they're there full time just like another staff member. And so we follow the school calendar. But that means they get to be there and become that focal point internal to the school. So as the students know, the teachers, administrators, to send the students to us. And so we work internally that way. And again, a focal point externally. We're not a silver bullet, but now you have that person, that catalyst on campus that can bring the resources to the students. And so, because it's anywhere from, needing a paper or pencil to get to math class, shoe in hand at a class and stuff instead of hanging out with her boyfriend and stuff and getting to class, and to clothes, to food, to the homelessness, to every imaginable, unfortunately, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse you can think of, we've dealt with. And so, we don't take care of those things. We don't even feed that child, but we work with the local food bank to do that. So we're again the catalyst that brings the resources and links them up with those students on site. And so, again, the teachers and counselors know that. They just don't have time to attend to all the students that have those issues, right, and stuff. And so we come in to help and make up that time.
And when you are building a new relationship, when you're entering a new school or a new area, what are sort of the steps in that process? What do you look for? What needs to be in place, and how do you go about it?
Well, first is to see what districts need. School districts have a need, and so either they have a high at-risk population, or another way you can also look at the economically disadvantaged numbers. And you don't have to be economically disadvantaged to be in our program, to be at risk, quote unquote, but it's just that, poverty precipitates a lot of these issues. And so it's a strong indicator that there's issues there. And in this forum, I'd like to point out, I guess too, that it's, when we're talking about rural areas, small towns, and I come from a very tiny place. And so, I work in a Fortune 200 company, but I graduated with a class size of 6 people. Okay, that's a public school, okay, in Texas. So 6 people in my graduating class, and so I know what that situation is like to be in a very remote, poor rural school, and there's just not a lot of knowledge and resources there. And so some of the smaller school districts in Texas, I know, can have high graduation rates and low dropout rates. So on the surface, you think, well, they don't, Mount Murray and Peckles, for instance, that's the situation there. But you scratch a little deeper and stuff, and like I said, you have a very high and growing economically disadvantaged number. And then you have issues, if you look closely at some of the numbers, SAT and ACT scores are not where they should be, well below the state average. And so, college preparation rates are not where they should be. The STAR scores are not where they should be. And so you can see kind of those other indicators for college, higher ed, even military preparedness are falling below level. And so really in a lot of the rural school districts, they're all at risk, if you will. So, that's important to realize.
Thank you.
Did I answer? I'm not sure I answered your complete question. But
you did. We could hear you talk about it for much longer, I'm sure. Daniel, I'm trying to spread the time evenly here because these are 3 very sort of important topics or buckets. Daniel, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about what you alluded to earlier, which is some of the findings from the survey, specifically focusing on access to care, access to mental health care. Can you talk more about what are sort of those barriers that are preventing access to care? Are they financial? Are they geographic? Specifically talking about rural areas, what are you finding?
Definitely financial and geographic. So the 2 communities that we work in, there is a mental health resource called MHMR. And so that's been the very just prevalent resource that's been used, but it hasn't been, in what we've heard, as helpful as youth need it to be. Financially, there are some barriers to that, and as far as geographically, Pecos and Bomber are in West Texas, and Pecos and Bomber are 45 minutes from each other, and Pecos is about an hour to an hour and a half from a place from Midland, Odessa, which would have more of these psychological resources. So what we've been doing is looking into bringing in teletherapy. So as the youth were saying earlier, that there's this evolution and just advancement in general, but especially in technology. In mental health, there's this same trend happening. So we're looking at teletherapy platforms that are HIPAA compliant, that are readily accessible to youth, that have great resources, therapists that are just that give different options of connecting with youth. So that's one way that we're looking to bring in the resource. Other barriers that we're coming across, as I mentioned before, was gender-based. So we're finding that as within these two schools, we heard that males might not reach out for resources, psychological resources, as much as females. And so that was part of the second part of the questionnaire, of asking what would some of those needs be. And so we're also partnering with a community college, Odessa College. They're present here, and they're providing wellness classes. So again, meeting the trends that we saw in the survey, the creative arts. So we have an art class, we have a yoga class, and then we have a jiu-jitsu class to bridge the creative arts, martial arts wellness that we saw in the survey. But I'm sure there are definitely a lot more barriers there, but those are the ones that we just saw on the surface based on our survey.
I wonder if also you are seeing some of the national trends we looked at in some earlier sessions, some of the testimonials we're hearing from our youth panelists around stress, sort of depression and anxiety as increasing elements of a young person's life. Are you finding that through your work with the LEAPS program and your other experience as well?
Definitely. So my training was done mostly in a trauma-informed way. So I worked with a lot of different, mostly adult populations that suffered from different levels of severe trauma. And so that's sort of already the bias that I come in with. And so in speaking to the youth, I'm realizing that a lot of the symptoms that we see are presented as anxiety and depression. And it's not to say that that's not there, but what I'm also hearing when I get more acquainted with them is that there's a deeper level of trauma that's happening. And so I think that's something that has to be addressed. But it's challenging because trauma is just very complex. And so I think when we look at data, at least how I think psychologically, we always have to look at what's happening underneath. And that requires us really being involved with the youth, hearing their voices, hearing their needs, and sometimes picking up on the subtleties that aren't really being said.
I'd also like to recognize that I know there's a lot of overlap between these areas, so please, if either of you would like to jump in on any particular topic, please feel free.
I'd just like to point out that I know we're coordinating, with IYF, and Daniel and I are looking at, and our teams, at different ways to bring the resources out to areas like the West Texas and the Permian Basin. And so the resources are sorely lacking already, and they've probably gotten worse in the last couple of years that I've been out there. And some of them have already disappeared, or they're extremely limited. So having Daniel out there and stuff has opened up, a lot of discussions that we need to have in trying to create a different type of network for those schools. Because we do deal with, there's a lot of, basically what is another form of PTSD. A lot of the kids that we work with, unfortunately, are some of the most severely at risk and some severely traumatized. And so they've been to all sorts of crisis and trauma. And so they're dealing with a form of PTSD that's not being addressed currently at the schools and, and really in the whole region. So again, we're hoping that some of our collaboration here and stuff means more resources or a different approach out there in the Permian Basin.
Shannon, have you found in your life skills instruction, your soft skills instruction in the classroom, that it can help young people sort of open up about some of these stressors that they're encountering? They have a lot of homework, their pressure from their parents. Do those topics come up?
Those topics come up on almost a daily basis. They the students are really, at the beginning of the year, like I said, they're not very open, but at this point, by the end of the year, they feel like we're pretty much all a family in the classroom. And I guess I'm lucky because we don't have people that come into the class like midway through the year, because it kind of throws you off. Then people lose that comfortableness. But they'll talk about just about anything. There are sometimes we do a lot of speeches, especially at the beginning of the year, just to get us started feeling comfortable talking either in groups or in front of the whole class, and that way it builds up to the presentation skills. But they'll open up, and there are some times that these students will get up and they're just like, they'll start talking about, well, my dad is in jail, so I have to talk to my uncle about this. Or, well, my mom, she was in rehab last week, and so I didn't have her sign this paper. And these are things that you wouldn't expect a student to say openly in front of all of their friends, and much less, even if they're not in the same group of friends, they're just in the classroom together. And one of the things we have in the classroom is what happens in our classroom stays in our classroom. It's almost, it's just that way. And the students are all very good about it. I haven't, in the 2 years that I've been doing this now in that class, I haven't had maybe once, twice, I think, where somebody came to me and said, Miss Wagner, so-and-so was talking about my situation. And usually it's the students that correct each other, that you're not supposed to talk about that outside because that's not what they wanted. And it's amazing how they'll talk about, we have this test coming up and I just don't know how I'm going to do it. And then somebody else in the class will go, oh, well, I'm going to be working on that tonight. Do you want to just get together and we can study on it after school? And it's two people that you wouldn't expect to be together, and yet they're willing to help each other out. And it's all because they realize they had the same anxiety or the same issues. And they also realize that they don't have the support at home either. So it's amazing. You'll have some of the kids that have like that perfect home life that everybody thinks they have, and then it comes out it's not quite as perfect as they expected it. And then the other kids that are sitting there that we all know have this terrible lifestyle at home, and they may be staying with this friend tonight and another friend tomorrow night, they're the ones that are going to be the most willing to step up and help the other ones that probably don't really need it, but they're willing to help them anyway. So it is a regular basis, but it's amazing to watch them all come together in the end.
It's great. So you're seeing sort of the creation of a better environment, and students are giving support to one another. This is something we also heard earlier this morning about how we need to do better as adults supporting young people, but also young people want to have these skills themselves, how to support their peers and their friends. Are there particular soft skills or life skills you think your students are coming into the classroom with already that are maybe unique to this group of young people? They have, of course, some tech skills, but are there other things which you see as real strengths in Generation Z, this cohort of young people?
What I see as far as one of their main strengths is their determination, which I don't know how else to fit this in, but it's just they come in and they know that nobody else may be expecting anything successful out of them. So if they're going to be something in life, they have to prove it. So they're not just proving to themselves, they're proving to their mom who's not around, or their dad who's not around, or a granny who's having to take them in because nobody else was there, and they're proving that I can be something. So when they have that determination, they're not going to let what somebody else thinks or what is expected of them to stop them. It may be that they think they're going to be an NBA player and they're only 5'3", but they're going to be determined and they're going to make a success out of themselves in something. And it's not always what they started out with, but they do get to see a success eventually because of that determination.
Great. I'd like to stay with this sort of successful vein and move to you, Daniel. What do you think are some of the low-hanging fruit? What are some of the solutions to the problems or the needs that you're finding that you think could be most easily implemented, or what are some of those easy, quick wins, if there are any? Maybe there aren't.
I think that's a very evolving question and answer for sure, at least is what we're seeing in our area and with our program. But the beauty of that is that we're able to continuously meet the needs of the youth. I think what's really been helpful is the honest and transparent feedback from the youth in the community, but also the adults. And I think the solutions that we're bringing in are actually, I'm really hoping, going to be a really good starter pack to helping address these more severe issues that we're hearing. What I found interesting about the data about the Gen Z population is that in my interactions with the youth is that I actually think they are able to communicating more. I think it just sounds differently from what we're used to. And I think if I compare myself to that, from when I was their age and the experiences that I was going through, I think my stresses were definitely different. And so for them, they've adapted. And I think it's our responsibility is also adapting the way that we listen. And I think when it comes to like the hanging fruit, I think they're a big part of that solution. So continuing to build those relationships, listen to them, and I think just continuing to be open to their input, as well as bringing in our professional opinions and offering that. And again, that goes to a larger wide spec because the youth are a part of the community. So when we look at these rural communities, it involves also working with administration, different organizations, and listening to their input because they're the ones that are interacting with the youth every single day. So they see things that we don't. So I think they're also a part of that solution and can also be those low-hanging fruit as well.
Do you think, just the other day we were talking about some sort of digital solutions to counseling and mental health support. Do you think there's a role to play for services like BetterHelp and other services which can overcome barriers to access? Where do you see that fitting into sort of the puzzle?
Definitely this, I don't know if all of you've heard of this teletherapy platform called BetterHelp. So it basically is a platform that provides telecounseling services, and it's all over the United States. And basically you create an account, and so let's take a youth, for example. They would create an account, have their parents consent, and they have the option of meeting with a counselor that's matched based on their interests or needs. And they have the option of meeting either through the phone, live chat, or video. And what's nice about it, it's, kids now are very involved with technology, and so there's an app for it, and so it's accessible. It's HIPAA compliant, and it just works well with the times. And what I've also, personally being involved with the app, in my communication with youth, the accessibility is also really, they enjoy that. There are some other options that we explored, so working with some other colleges to bring in interns so that they're able to get hours, but also provide these services. And then there's another university that we thought about, including the telecounseling, but also telepsychiatry. So there's really a lot of opportunities, but I think definitely the teletherapy is going to fit with our model.
Great, and I'd like to give Eliseo a chance to be optimistic and positive here, and focus on some models or some activities that you think are particularly apt for scale up, that could be very successful if applied, not universally but more broadly.
Well, I mean, first I'll answer the low-hanging fruit. The first thing I'm going to do is recruit Shannon to the Permian Basin. So it's like, you ever thought about moving to the Permian Basin? She does. We do groups as well as one-on-one and groups and campus-wide events, and so your model is basically what we do when we're doing group sessions, and so it's like that would fit perfectly in our organization. Just I know he's eyeballing me, that principal, but it's like But
You're poaching her here on stage. Oh
you
my
know,
gosh.
so live on camera. So okay, but no, I think that a couple things. There's a lot of taking over the organization up in Permian Basin. I brought some of my own ideas and gotten other ideas from some of the other larger affiliates, because we're in 28 communities in the state of Texas. And so, of course, you've got your Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. Here's a wonderful organization just here in town. But so I steal their ideas all the time. And so, and we're a much smaller organization out there, but we're growing, and we've added a lot more programs to it. And so, because of my background, I've added a lot of STEM programs. And, and there's some other examples, but people ask me why are you doing that? And because these are the at-risk kids. Those are the kids that are on the bubble, stuff, or struggling to get through school. So why are you creating this big STEM gyms and for girls, and we're talking about robotics teams, and we're adding all these components again at for these lower level kids, if you will. And the deal is that they're forgotten by the time we get to them. We're doing triage there at the high schools especially, and at the middle schools. And so they deserve the same opportunities as the honor kids do, as far as I see. Because like I said, I come from that background, and I know I have friends that have been extremely successful that were quote unquote at-risk students. And so, and as a teacher, it goes back to my few days, as a school teacher, where I had kids in my physics class, which was the on-level physics class, and they were extremely talented and bright. And I could see that in them. And, and I'm start talking to them about college and, or being in honors class instead of my class. And, they just looked at me with this, dumbfounded look. And I'm like, what's the matter? Well, no one's talked to me about college since I was like, in second grade. And so I have juniors and seniors. And so a lot of these, time after time, that was always the response. And so I've got kids in my class now who have gone a decade, and no one's talked to them about going to college. And that to me is just utterly irresponsible of us, and unacceptable. And so I wanted to do that. So, and again, and that was some of the experience I had personally and stuff growing up, where people didn't think you should be a certain place. And so it all, that's why I'm out there, but cycling all the way back around, and so bringing it full circle. And so these kids deserve that same chance and opportunity. Now, that's one thing, but the other aspect of it too is stuff. It's not that difficult. The scale-up portion of it, really, our entire model boils down to one thing, and that's having a caring adult that will sit down and have the time, or be willing to spend the time to meet with these students and listen, not talk, but listen, and create this caring relationship with them. So it's very scalable when you think of it in those terms. It's like, it just takes an adult to sit down and stuff and spend the time. Some of these kids, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, just don't have someone waiting for them at home. Or they've got all the responsibilities, right, and stuff, and all the stuff they've got to take care of because mom is, in jail, or mom is working 3 jobs to make things work, or some other, most of the time some female that's taking care of them. And so they need someone that's just spend some time with them. Ask them how they're doing that day. That's all it takes. So even, especially in the rural communities and stuff, even there you would think that that's not the situation, but it often is, because there's so much work going on and so many other outside obstacles that, again, it just comes down to that. And so that's what, Joanna did over here with Anna, and she's done with a bunch of other kids, and all of our coordinators out there do a great job. And so whether it's San Antonio or Balmaray, that's really what my folks do. They sit down and spend some time with these kids and talk to them and find out what's going on in their lives. And that's all they need sometimes. Sometimes they just need a hello, and how are you doing today? And that makes all the world, the world difference to them. And that's all it's going to take. And so, is it scalable? Yeah, that's the scalable part of it, really, in a nutshell. Stuff is like, we need adults that are willing to do that, or give me some money to hire people and stuff. Okay, so, and we'll make it happen. So,
having a caring adult in your life as a young person can make a difference. I'd like to open it up for questions from the group or from online participants. I think we have a few more minutes remaining. if anyone has a question for our panelists. Sure.
So my question is around the mental health. First, I love the idea of telemedicine. How are we footing the cost of that? And then the second piece of that is, we were talking at lunch about how different it is to parent a child now than it was when we were being parented. And I think that a lot of the parents of these kids who may be dealing with mental health don't have any experience with that and don't know what to do. So how can we help the parents to understand what their kids need when it comes to that?
So the first question, for the costs, we have some money based off our donor that we put aside for this specific need. So it's through a grant that we're providing that service. And the second piece goes to, I think, something that a couple of the youth had said earlier, where it was, how do we provide these same services to the parents? But it's more in the realm of psychoeducation. So we've also played with some ideas around creating a trauma-informed training that could be also implemented to the schools, the parents, just to get them exposed to the idea that this is probably happening. And then also following up with that with supportive resources with the mental health. So what's really nice about the BetterHelp platform is that because they're minors and the parents are on there, they are also in connection with the therapist. So if there's any questions that the parents have, they are also able to connect with the therapist. Granted, there's limits of what can be talked because the minor is, the client, so they're not able to share certain confidential information. But that's also a resource for the parent. But I agree that definitely there needs to be more psychoeducational support for parents, administration, school, everyone who's working with youth.
A question. How about the children who need help, whether it's like with food or the mental help or something? What about the parents who are unwilling to allow their children to have help?
So that's a really good and tough question, because if there are adults, especially parents, that aren't providing certain needs, then we do have certain services like child protective services that would have to come in, and they would be the ones that handle that. And again, that also fits within the model of the teletherapy because that's also implemented there. So if there are any parents that aren't able to provide certain needs and that's reported to someone, then we do have those types of services that come in. If there are just parents that are maybe just resistant to the idea of this new just support, then we want to work with them, connecting with them, and just slowly trying to understand their perspective. And that usually helps people drop down their barriers and their defenses. So those are kind of more the extreme, but did that answer your question? Okay.
Okay. I just want to add to that. Part of what I do in my classroom, if it seems like there's a student that is facing some struggle and it's apparent that their family background isn't allowing them to reach for certain services, then what I try to do is bring it up in a classroom setting so that we can suggest all the different ideas that are out there and the options that student would have. And then if they're seeing it, and granted they're the ones who are wanting it, then we can find a way as a class collaborating to come up with a way to explain to the families that it's not meaning anything negative to ask for these things. And I know we have programs where we have the snacks that are provided and they can pick them up on Friday for the weekend and stuff like that, just for the food. And at first, nobody wanted to go pick it up because, well, I don't want anybody to know that my parent's not going to give me food. But then they decided, hey, so-and-so's getting it, so why can't I get it? So, and it's the same way with parents. Oh, well, they went and got it. They let their kids get it. I'm going to let my kids get it. So it's kind of like once it becomes known within the student population, then it gets brought home and it gets known within the parent population too. And hopefully it gets to the right people just by that aspect also.
Before she gets me in further trouble. Just in the campuses that we serve, communities and schools, a student can go to their coordinator to help them with that. So working with the school counselors and administrators, we'll bring whether it's CPS or whatever, other agencies need to step in, and we can try to do something about that, or talk to the parent ourselves. And anyway, before we do get a parent consent form, so just to make that clear.
Great. I'm so glad we're spending time on this. It's a wonderful discussion and panel. And I wanted to follow up on Jill's question about the cost, because I think that's a really important one. And Danielle, you did a beautiful job of explaining how we're going to do this under this project. But this is a real issue, whether it's teletherapy, but how we really provide access to mental health services. And so welcome ideas, particularly from our tech-savvy friends, of how we can do that and how we can really look at this for future investment. And then also to pick up on our wonderful panel this morning of our young leaders who talked about the peer-to-peer issue. And I'd love to hear from all of you about how you've addressed mental health within the school environment or within your communities to also help peers, because we've talked a lot about the adult-student relationship, but as we know, regardless of that, they're spending most of their day with their peers. And how have you seen that peer-to-peer strengthening working? You mentioned a couple examples, but things that also we're now at IYF in particular investing in trauma, really trauma-related stress, and how our staff and how we can really be best prepared to work, and also in the peer-to-peer area.
Well, as far as peer-to-peer, we have a couple of programs in place right now at a few, most of the high schools that we deal with, not in Pecos and Balmorhea, but in Odessa and Midland. XY Zone, it's a male mentoring program, and it's made where we have students that are not only at risk, but specifically did not have a male role model in their life for whatever reason, and so they get a little bit of extra attention, more on that front, and learning what it is to really be, a man in today's society, and a little more direction. And the female counterparts of that called Project Athena, which is more based on, I wouldn't say, yes, role modeling, but girl empowerment, and again, with the same idea of like these are students that need a little bit more attention, a little more hand-holding when it comes to developing their role model. And the reason I mention those is because those programs heavily involve group sessions, and so back to your point of recruiting her, because they're heavily based on group sessions, and so they depend. There's activities and discussions that are heavily dependent on them working with each other. And so, and then that kind of branches out and spills over into our general CIS population. A lot of our coordinators use that same training to have group sessions within their roster of case managed students. And then, like I said, as far as the mental health in general, stuff I know, like I said, Daniel and I are working on a couple of ideas, and then some other fronts. And stealing, again, going back to my, favorite form of stealing ideas, is because some of the, like here in San Antonio, for instance, they have their own cadre of counselors and therapists. They're employed by CIS that give back to the school districts. And so on the mental health front, they have a whole nother level of counseling that's available to them. And so I'm working on that. It's very, very tough to get, someone like an LPC, licensed professional counselor, out the permanent basis. I'll tell you how tough it is. I actually hired one. I did a heavy song and dance sales job and got a young lady from Austin, and it got her to agree to move to Midland and be my first LPC and head up my new mental health team. And she lasted a month before she was poached away from me. And so, and that's what I was afraid of. I was hoping to get a year and a half out of her. I got 1 month. And so, I mean, she's doing great. She's going to do great work with another organization, but there's just a huge void there in the mental health front. And so, like I said, Daniel and I got to continue to work on that, at least in the Permian Basin.
We actually have I'm not sure if she's an actual licensed counselor, but she works with the, within the region, and she comes out. And I had used her last year. She would come, it was 12 weeks, so she came one day a week, and she would talk to my classes. And it was pretty much, she treated it as if it was a group counseling session, but it was more or less a teaching session. And she would just explain to me, hey, this is a situation, but she talked to them on their level. She didn't say, this is what we as adults see or anything. She would say, well, I know kids do it this way. And she would bring it out because I guess she used her children as an example, but she also used what she had learned from her other classes. And by putting it at their level, the students were then pretty much in charge of the whole discussion. And everything was open for discussion in there. And then whatever came out of that, she offered one-on-one counseling later in the week so that they did have something to follow up on if it opened anything up that they needed to talk about. So to me, I think that was a good benefit. And I didn't use it in my class this year, but she did come back and she spoke in my counterpart. He also teaches teen leadership, and he used her the once a week, and she was there doing the same program this year. So I think it's a beneficial thing for us too.
Why is addressing mental health needs essential for the success of soft skills programming? And how do you integrate these sometimes separate approaches? Actually, I'll take this one first, since we use soft skills programming in a lot of our interventions. A couple things that I would say is, one, have a plan, have contingencies for when it comes up, because it may likely come up. Some soft skills, behavioral skills instruction can bring up deeper issues. And two, knowing where your limits are, knowing what services you can provide, and then seeking out other providers through referrals or relationships that can provide another level of service or care. Not sure if either of you.
Kind of to piggyback off of what he just said, when you get into the discussion, you don't always know what's going to come up, but you can be prepared for the things that you know will come up. And a lot of times, things that they say, that the students are going to say, they don't realize that it's an issue. They just think it's part of the way life is. So when it comes up and then it hits home with somebody else, or even better situation, if they say something and it catches me off guard as a teacher, and I'm like, oh man, that really hit home. Either it's something I dealt with as my child in my childhood, or with one of my own children. And that's when it becomes that personal issue, and you have to be ready for it, and you have to be willing to talk about it. And I think what we do, or what I try to do, is once they have that ability to feel comfortable enough to talk, even if I definitely don't have the answers, but I know who I can take them to. So I'll tell them, I'll go, if you're not comfortable talking about this with them, I'll go with you. And then that makes it a lot easier for them, because they're not alone in the situation. And then they're more willing to open up to that person. And even if it means that they're sitting there staring at me while they're talking to that counselor then is the one who's able to give them the help that they need.
To piggyback really quickly of what you both were saying, I think also, and it connects to the psychoeducation that we were talking about earlier, is discussing the level of boundaries that you were mentioning. So when it comes to people that are working with you directly, it's definitely a subjective call. What do you feel comfortable listening to? And it's always a process of active listening. But definitely developing those personal boundaries that you know within yourself. And then how do we teach adults how to do that? How do we encourage that type of support, but also teach them to follow their gut when it comes to knowing where their scope of work is when it comes to that type of support.
So we have just 2 or 3 minutes left. We have another question from the online poll. We'll maybe take another question from the room. This is building, I think we covered a lot of this around peer-to-peer approaches, but how do peer-to-peer approaches specifically help to break down stigmas related to seeking mental health care? So I think we sort of talked about a little of this before. Do any of you want to add on what you've said?
We haven't done this, but we discussed bringing in services that are called peer mediation. So this falls in line with teaching youth, again, these soft skills of how to implement for themselves, but also how to use it within their youth colleagues. And it also teaches them how to resolve conflict. So it's sort of the way that I like to think of it is like light therapy for youth. So they learn these skills of how to communicate with each other, how do you discuss certain things, how do you set boundaries, and how do you support each other in a way that it is needed in the moment.
I think with the question also, with it saying that it breaks down the stigma, a lot of times just to hear that you're not alone and that other people have these same thoughts or feelings or concerns or however you want to phrase it, knowing that somebody else is going through it just makes it easier. I mean, for adults, for children, for whoever, if you're worried about something and it's causing you that stress, that anxiety that we're going through on a regular basis, but everybody is facing it, or at least one other person is facing it, it makes it okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means you're normal. So I think a lot of times that's what the kids are looking for.
I'll just say real briefly, it's like that it does. I mean, if you're in West Texas, overcoming the conservative West Texas culture or the Hispanic culture where it's taboo to talk about these kinds of things, it does go a long way. When folks are young and have nice pink brains that are still, malleable and stuff, it's like it makes a big difference. And, we deal with mental health issues, what it is to be a person these days, to homophobia. I mean, all these things come up that wouldn't have come up in normal, everyday discussions, at least not, especially in the places like the Permian Basin. And we have those discussions with our students, and so it makes a big difference.
So much to talk about. We can take one more question. Sure, in the back.
We've talked a lot about the gap or the lack of services that are in our area. I work in Pecos, I work in Monahans, I work in Odessa. So I see the lack of mental health services. It doesn't really matter the size of the community in Permian Basin, there's just a lack. What are we doing to bridge the gap between mental health and career pathways? Are we encouraging students to go into those fields of study? What are we doing about that? How are we filling that pipeline of future psychologists, future family therapists like Daniel, that they could come back home and provide those services like Daniel's doing? Are we doing that?
I think that we try to incorporate that. Like I said, I've got a great team, and I've brought in folks by program coordinator Hilda Sanchez and Dr. Morelos back there, my development director, are both really good now, helping me. Whenever we add a component to our program, whether it's STEM or otherwise, we're continuing adding this, we're purposely now trying to add that component on top, vertically as well as horizontally, where we not only inform them about and start the discussions and dialogues about the issues and topics, but we build on top now a direct discussion about careers in that particular topic. And so that has come up. I'll start to hear now, we have our senior celebration, and we have a banquet type celebration for all our students who are going to graduate and make it through our program. And I hear more and more success stories from those kind of kids, and it'll pop up now. A lot of our staff are social workers or social worker-ish, and I'll hear graduates now, some of these kids are graduating, saying, I want to be like you. I want to do what you do. I want to be a social worker. And so we're modeling for them. So, I think that we are leading them in that direction. I like to think that we are making, inroads in that, career path or new career paths for them.
One of the programs that I use within my class, it's an online portal and it's called Zello. It's basically like career cruising was, and it lets the students research what they're wanting to be. And through discussions and finding out all these things, and I think by modeling the assistance that people can get, they're seeing a lot more opportunities of things that are out there for them to do. And then like you just said, they're seeing the people that helped them through situations. So these same people, it's just like if back to the NBA or whatever, if they see somebody as that's what made them successful, that's what made them look good to the rest of the community and everybody loves watching them. If they see this mental health person that helped them and helped their friends through tough situations, they're going to want to be that also. So I think just by giving them the opportunity to see it, as well as the opportunity to learn more about it, it's going to open up the eyes of more people. That, and then it's not as when we were growing up, back when we were all, not too long ago, but when we were growing up, people didn't want to go to a mental health counselor. They didn't want to have to ask for help. And nowadays it's not, and we're trying to point out that it's not a bad thing to do that. So with that, we're letting people know it's good to go into that profession to be that helper for other people.
Definitely piggybacking what you were saying, destigmatizing, and that involves conversation at all levels, whether it's within the adults or the youth. But we also had some ideas similar to what Lisa was saying with, in regard, if it's not just, psychology, but other career pathways. We looked at job fairs. There's a service that we implemented with some of the schools called Virtual Job Shadow that allows students to basically shadow online. And so they look at different career fields that are available, and the people that are in these videos aren't actors, they're actual individuals that work in these fields, and so they're able to see firsthand what it takes to be this type of, to pursue this career, but also what it takes to just embody that type of persona.
Okay, and that's the last word. Thank you, Shannon, Daniel, and Eliseo for sharing your experiences with us. I really appreciate it, and thank you, audience, for your participation. That's that.